My name is Chloe Bennett. I'm 38 years old. And what I'm about to tell you happened in October of last year, when my life, quiet, steady, imperfect, but peaceful, was flipped upside down in a single night. That Wednesday afternoon, our Boston apartment smelled faintly like pencil shavings and warm cocoa. The kind of small, ordinary comfort you don't notice until it's threatened. I was hunched over the kitchen table, helping Charlie with her math homework. She had her bottom lip caught between her teeth, brows pinched tight in concentration, like the problem had personally offended her. Okay, I said gently. If we break it down, it's not scary. Charlie glanced up at me, eyes big and blue, ocean blue, the kind of eyes that make strangers soften without understanding why. Then she scribbled something on the paper, paused, and suddenly her face lit up. I got it, she squealed, bouncing in her chair. Her laughter filled the apartment like sunlight. That sound, her joy, had become the most precious thing in my life. I smiled so hard my cheeks hurt. See? You're smarter than you think. She leaned over and pressed a quick kiss to my cheek, like she was rewarding me for believing in her. And right then my phone rang. The name on the screen made my stomach drop before I even answered. Stephanie Parker. My sister rarely called unless it was about one thing: family. I stared at the screen for half a second too long, and Charlie noticed. Is it Grandpa? She whispered, suddenly hopeful, like she'd been waiting for this moment her whole life. I swallowed. Let's see, I answered. Steph? Her voice came through bright and excited, almost too cheerful, like she was trying to paint over something old and ugly. Chloe, Dad's throwing his 65th birthday party at Harborview. It's a big one. You have to come. My throat tightened. Harborview wasn't just a restaurant. It was the kind of place people name-dropped to prove they belonged somewhere they were afraid of losing. Valet parking. VIP rooms. Servers who smiled like they were trained to never show disgust. And my family. My family loved places like that. Loved the way luxury made them feel superior. I hadn't been in the same room as my father in 6 years. 6 years since I'd walked away from the career he'd mapped out for me, like my life was his property. 6 years since the fight that ended with him staring at me like I was a stranger wearing my face. After that, our relationship survived only in stiff holiday calls and distant updates filtered through Stephanie, the only one who still acted like I might be worth something. Chloe? Stephanie pressed, her tone shifting slightly. Are you there? I'm here, I said, but my voice sounded far away, even to me. Charlie climbed into my lap without asking, wrapping her arms around my waist like she could anchor me to her warmth. She looked up at me, whispering with a kind of fragile hope that made my chest ache. Mom, I want to meet Grandma and Grandpa. I can barely remember their faces anymore. Her words hit like little arrows, piercing straight through every wall I'd built. Because the truth was, I'd kept my distance to protect myself. But Charlie hadn't chosen any of this. She hadn't chosen my pride, or my pain, or my father's disappointment. And she definitely hadn't chosen to grow up with a family shaped like a missing tooth, always noticeable when she smiled. Stephanie kept talking, like she sensed she was winning. Everyone wants to see you and Charlie. Seriously, Dad's been asking. She hesitated, then added carefully, How's work? There it was, the test. I felt suddenly exposed, like my life was about to be inspected for flaws. I'm stable, I said, trying to keep it neutral. Stephanie hummed. Still insecurity? The way she said the word made it sound like a stain, like something you couldn't fully wash out. I clenched my jaw. Yes. And you're not doing night shifts anymore, right? She asked, pretending it was casual, but I heard the judgment wrapped in curiosity. Charlie's fingers tightened around my shirt, like she could feel my tension. I'm fine, I said. Everything's handled. Stephanie went quiet for a beat, then softened her voice. Okay, look, Dad's 65. This is important. Just come, for Charlie, if not for him. I looked down at my daughter. Her eyes were wide and pleading. And in them, I saw the version of myself I couldn't bear to disappoint. The version that still believed family could be warm. Still believed people could change. I exhaled slowly, like I was stepping off a ledge. Fine, I said. We'll come, but don't expect miracles. Charlie let out a little squeal of happiness so pure it almost made me regret ever hesitating. Really? Really, really? She asked, bouncing in my lap like a spark. I nodded, forcing a smile. Really. But even as I said it, something heavy settled in my chest. An old instinct, quiet but persistent. A warning. Because hope, I've learned, can be dangerous when you offer it to the wrong people. For the next few days, Charlie acted like we were preparing for a royal event. She dragged every fancy dress out of her closet, princess dresses I'd bought on sale, carefully saving for months because I wanted her to have what I never did, small moments of magic. She tried them on again and again, spinning in front of the mirror, asking the same questions with the same shining excitement. Will Grandma like me? Will Grandpa think I'm pretty? Do you think they'll hug me? Every time my heart twisted tighter, because I didn't know, and the part of me that used to be a daughter before I became a mother didn't trust my father's love to be gentle. Then the day came. Morning light slipped through the cracks of our apartment blinds. Charlie stood in front of the mirror in a pale pink dress, the one I'd bought her for her birthday 2 months earlier. She spun slowly, smiling so wide it looked like it might split her face. "Mom," she whispered, eyes sparkling, "do I look okay?" "You look beautiful," I told her, and I meant it so deeply it hurt. For a moment, it felt like things might actually be fine. Like maybe my family would see Charlie and remember they were human. And then my phone rang again. A sharp, urgent ringtone. The office number. My skin crawled before I even answered. "Bennett," I said, already bracing. "Chloe!" Mike's voice crashed through the speaker. He was the coordinator, always calm until the moment he wasn't. "Jeff got in a motorcycle accident. He was supposed to handle tonight's shift at Harborview." My breath caught. "Harborview?" I repeated, like maybe I misheard. "Yeah, we're short. Everyone else is covering the downtown event. We can't drop that contract, Chloe. You know how big Harborview is for us." I stared at Charlie. She was smoothing the folds of her dress, humming softly, completely unaware of the storm rising in my hands. My mind spiraled. If I cancel now, I crush her dream before it even starts. If I go, I walk into my family's world wearing the exact uniform they despise. Charlie turned and saw my face. Her smile faded instantly. "Do you have to go to work?" she asked quietly. I looked into her eyes, and I realized something with sick clarity. No matter what I chose, my daughter was about to learn something painful. I swallowed hard, like I was forcing down a rock. "We're still going," I said. "I'll combine both." Charlie blinked. "You mean—" "I'll figure it out," I promised, even though my heart was hammering with fear. My hands trembled as I called Stephanie back. Each ring felt like it stretched longer than it should. She answered with a bright, excited tone. "Are you ready?" I forced my voice steady. "Steph, I'll bring Charlie to the restaurant first. Can you pick her up in the lobby and take her in? I'll come in later." A pause. Then her voice lowered. "You're not coming in with her." "I have something urgent to handle," I said quickly. "Just, please, pick her up." Stephanie exhaled, like she was reluctantly agreeing to something inconvenient. "Fine, I'll pick her up. Everyone will be happy to see her." We hung up, and I stood in front of the mirror, pulling on my formal black security uniform. For a second, I froze. The woman staring back at me looked capable, strong, controlled. But I also saw the ghost of the girl my father used to scold. The one he thought he could shape into someone he could brag about. I almost called Stephanie again to tell her the truth. But I imagined the reaction, the look, the tone, the way my family always turned my job into a verdict on my worth. So I didn't. I told myself a job doesn't define me. I told myself I'll explain later. I didn't know that later would come with knives. At precisely 7 p.m., I parked in Harborview's employee lot, not nervous about work, terrified for my daughter. Charlie gripped my hand as we walked through the checkpoint. Her tiny nails dug into my skin like she was holding on to the only familiar thing left. Inside the glass doors, the restaurant glittered with wealth. And standing near the front desk, perfect hair, perfect outfit, perfect posture, was Stephanie. She looked like she belonged here. She looked like everything my family worshipped. Image, status, success. Charlie's face lit up. "Aunt Stephanie!" Stephanie smiled brightly, rushing forward. "Charlie, my sweet girl." For one beautiful second, it looked real, like love might actually win. Then Stephanie's eyes flicked to me, to my uniform, to the radio clipped to my shoulder. The smile fell off her face like it had never been real at all. Shock replaced it, then embarrassment, then something colder. Through my radio, a voice crackled. "Bennett, VIP room position in 30 minutes. Stephanie's expression tightened, like the radio had just exposed a secret she didn't want anyone to hear. She leaned in, whispering sharply, "Chloe, why are you wearing a security uniform?" Every syllable was heavy with judgment. I lifted my chin. "Because I'm working here tonight." Stephanie's eyes flashed. Then she lowered her voice even more, glancing around like she was afraid someone important might recognize me as her sister. "You said you had a good position," she hissed. "You said you were stable." "I am stable," I said calmly, though my chest burned. "Take Charlie inside. I'll come as soon as I can." Stephanie's jaw tightened. And as she reached for Charlie's hand, she leaned close to her niece's ear and whispered, loud enough for me to hear, "Don't tell anyone about your mom's job, okay?" The words didn't hurt because of my pride. They hurt because they were aimed at my child. Because in one sentence, my sister tried to teach Charlie that love comes with conditions. That dignity depends on what you wear. Charlie glanced back at me, worry creeping into her bright eyes. I forced a smile for her. I bent down and kissed her forehead, holding her small face in my hands, like I could shield her with touch alone. Go, I whispered. I'll be right behind you. Charlie nodded, but her fingers clung to mine for one extra second, like she sensed something was wrong, like her little heart was trying to warn me. And as Stephanie led her away toward the hallway of the VIP rooms, I stood in the glittering lobby, watching my daughter disappear into my family's world. A world that had never forgiven me for being different. A world that I suddenly realized might not even spare an 11-year-old child if she was connected to the wrong kind of mother. For the next 2 hours, I moved like a shadow through Harborview's polished corridors, checking doors, scanning faces, guiding drunk guests away from trouble before trouble could become a headline. It was the kind of work people only notice when it fails. And while I worked, my mind stayed trapped in one place, that VIP room, the Sapphire Room, the place where my family was celebrating my father like he was royalty, and where my daughter, my baby, was supposed to be safe. Every few minutes, I caught myself imagining her, Charlie sitting in a chair, with her legs swinging under the table, Charlie laughing politely at an uncle's boring story, Charlie pulling a handmade card out of her little purse and handing it to Grandpa with nervous pride. I pictured my mother, Betty, softening when she saw Charlie's face. I pictured my father, Howard, at least pretending to care, if only for appearances. I clung to those images like a life raft, because the alternative was too ugly to hold in my head. And yet, Stephanie's whisper kept replaying in my ears. Don't tell anyone about your mom's job. Like my work was a dirty secret. Like I was something that could infect Charlie's worth by association. A waiter brushed past me, carrying a silver tray of champagne flutes. I stepped aside automatically. Professional. Invisible. In the reflection of a mirrored wall, I caught a glimpse of myself. Black uniform, hair pulled back, jaw set tight. I looked like a woman who had learned how to survive. And for a second, I wondered if my family would ever understand that survival is its own kind of success. Or if they would only ever measure life by titles that impress strangers. My radio crackled again. Bennett, can you cover the West Corridor? We've got a VIP guest complaining about noise. On it, I replied. My voice sounded calm, controlled. Inside, I was counting minutes like they were heartbeats. At 8:10, I checked my phone. No messages from Stephanie. At 8:27, I checked again. Nothing. At 8:44, my stomach started to twist. Because in my family, silence was never neutral. Silence was a decision, a choice to look away. I told myself Stephanie was busy, that parties get loud, that Charlie was probably eating dessert and wouldn't even notice how long I was gone. But the truth was, I didn't trust them. Not fully. Not after 6 years of being treated like a failure they had to explain away at dinners. Not after I saw the way Stephanie's smile died when she recognized my uniform. And yet I still trusted them with my child. That realization landed like a punch to the ribs. At around 9 p.m., after handling a minor argument near the bar, I finally got a 5-minute break. I stepped into the staff corridor, leaned back against the wall, and drank water too fast. My hands shook slightly. I looked down at my phone again. Still nothing. I was about to return to my post when my radio crackled. This time, urgent. Bennett. It was Pete, the security manager, a man who didn't raise his voice unless something had already crossed a line. Can you check the Sapphire Room? He asked. VIP guests there need assistance. Something's off. My heart seized so hard I almost dropped the water bottle. The Sapphire Room. The room where my family was. I didn't answer right away. Because I already knew. I didn't know what I knew, but I knew. Bad instincts aren't loud. They're quiet. They sit in your gut like a stone and wait for proof. I'm on my way, I said, voice tight. My feet moved before my mind could argue. The hallway toward the VIP rooms felt longer than it should have been. The carpet was thick under my boots, muffling my steps like the building itself was trying to keep secrets. Outside the Sapphire Room, I paused. One hand lifted toward the door handle. Cold metal. My palm was damp. For a second, I didn't push. I listened. I heard laughter. Glasses clinking. Music, soft jazz. Elegant, cruelly peaceful. No crying. And that almost made it worse. Because if Charlie was crying and no one could hear her, then she'd already learned the lesson my family was teaching. That her pain didn't matter in a room full of important people. I inhaled and pushed the door open. At first, everything blurred. The light hit me like a slap, golden and bright over the long table. Expensive wine, candles, plates arranged like art. My family sat together in their little kingdom, smiling and talking. My father at the head of the table, posture proud, playing the role he loved best. My mother beside him, laughing too loudly. Stephanie in a polished dress, hair perfect, nodding along like she was auditioning for approval. Relatives I hadn't seen in years. Business partners, neighbors. And then my eyes found the darkest corner of the room. Charlie, standing. Her plate tilted awkwardly in her hands, food sliding toward the edge. Her shoulders shook with each breath, like she was trying not to make sound. Tears streaked her cheeks, some wet, some dried. Her pale pink dress, my birthday dress for her, was stained with sauce and crumbs like someone had bumped her and no one bothered to help. My vision narrowed until the entire room became just that small figure. That child, my child. A burning sensation surged from my feet to my skull, like electricity ripping through my body. For a second, I forgot I was working. Forgot rules. Forgot the radio on my shoulder. I crossed the room so fast, chairs scraped as people turned to look. Charlie, I breathed, dropping to my knees in front of her. Her eyes lifted to mine, red, swollen. Not the eyes of a kid who'd had a small disappointment. The eyes of a kid who'd been taught she was lesser. I pulled her into my arms. She was trembling so hard it felt like her bones were shaking. "Baby, why are you standing here?" I whispered. "Why aren't you sitting with everyone?" Her lips quivered. She glanced toward the table like she was afraid someone would punish her for telling the truth. Then she whispered so softly I almost didn't hear it. "Grandma said the seats had to be saved for important guests." My hands tightened around her. "Important guests?" My gaze snapped toward the table, and that's when I saw it. 2 empty chairs. Right there, right beside the laughter. Empty. Waiting. Not needed. Not saved. Just left empty on purpose. Charlie's voice continued, shakier now. "And Grandpa said, I shouldn't sit at the same table with them because you're just a security guard." The words hit me so hard my chest went numb. My own father, saying that about me. To my daughter, I stood up slowly, still holding Charlie's small hand in mine. My fingers closed around hers, like a vow. The room had fallen quieter. Even the jazz felt muted now. Howard Parker turned his head toward me, like he'd just noticed the staff. His eyes flicked over my uniform with disgust, so effortless it was practiced. Then he smiled, half a smile, sharp-edged, meant to cut. "Oh," he said loudly, for the entire room. "The security guard is here. I'm glad you found work that suits you." The word security guard landed like spit. My mother Betty didn't meet my eyes. She fixed her napkin, pretending irritation like she was the one inconvenienced. I could feel Charlie's tiny fingers gripping mine tighter. I swallowed. Slow, controlled. Because if I exploded, they'd call me unstable. If I cried, they'd call me weak. If I begged, they'd call me pathetic. So I did the thing they never expected from me. I held my ground. "Why does my daughter have to stand and eat?" I asked, voice steady enough to scare even me. Betty waved a hand vaguely, fake annoyance in every movement. "We don't have enough room for everyone," she said. I glanced again at the 2 empty chairs, undeniable proof that she was lying straight to my face. Howard lifted his wine glass, took a slow sip like he was enjoying a show, and then said with a smirk, "She can stand, just like her mom stands all day. That's her job, right?" Something inside my head started ringing, like a warning bell. My nails dug into my palm. Stephanie sat frozen, eyes down, face turned toward her plate like she'd suddenly become fascinated by her food. Not one word. Not one defense? Not even a glance at Charlie's stained dress. My daughter was their flesh and blood, and they treated her like an inconvenience. I leaned down to Charlie's level again, forcing my voice gentle so she wouldn't be afraid of me on top of them. "Sweetheart," I asked softly, "why didn't you come find me? Why didn't you tell me?" Charlie's lips trembled. "They wouldn't let me leave," she whispered. "Grandma said I'd bother you. Grandpa said I had to know my place." Know my place. They told an 11-year-old that. My throat tightened so hard I almost couldn't breathe. I stood up again. And this time I wasn't just angry. I was clear. I turned toward the table, letting my gaze sweep across every adult who had watched my child suffer in silence. 2 empty chairs. Bright as an accusation. "Explain it," I said, voice shaking now. "Explain why Charlie has to stand when there are 2 empty chairs right there." Stephanie finally moved. She fidgeted with her napkin, still refusing to look up, and muttered the words that made my blood boil. "Chloe, don't make a big deal out of this." Then, colder. Charlie didn't complain. My head snapped toward her. "She was crying," I said, each word heavy. 2 hours, and not one of you gave an 11-year-old a seat. Howard slammed his glass down with a harsh clink. He stood up, face flushed with wine and long-stored contempt. You've always blown everything out of proportion, he barked. That's why you never succeed. The old wound reopened instantly. I felt it in my ribs, in my throat, in the place where a daughter used to want her father's approval. I lifted my chin. I left the path you wanted, I said, voice hard, and you've punished me for it ever since. But you don't get to punish my child. Howard's finger pointed at my uniform like it was evidence in court. Look at you, he sneered, wearing that cheap uniform when you could have been somebody. Betty joined in, trembling but sharp. You've embarrassed everyone here, she hissed. These are business people, Chloe. Wealthy people. I laughed once, a bitter sound that didn't feel like mine. So that's why, I said quietly. You made your granddaughter stand because you're ashamed of me. The room held its breath. No one spoke. Not Aunt Helen with her jangling bracelets. Not Uncle Ben with his cigar-stained fingers. Not the Millers, not the Johnsons, my father's precious business partners. Not even the neighbor who used to brag about the brilliant daughter Howard could have had. They all stared at plates and glasses like cowards. And then, the door opened. A man stepped inside, eyes scanning the room with concern. David Cooper, the restaurant owner. He looked at the tense faces, the silent table, and then his gaze landed on me. For a split second, confusion flickered. Then recognition struck, and his expression shifted into surprise. Ms. Bennett, he said, stepping forward. What a surprise. I didn't know you were personally handling security tonight. Thank you for how professionally you handled that situation earlier. The room tilted. My family's heads snapped toward him in unison. Howard blinked, confused, then suspicious. He looked between me and Cooper like he was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't make sense. You know the security guard? Howard asked slowly. Cooper frowned. Security guard? He repeated, genuinely baffled. Then he turned fully toward Howard, eyebrows lifting like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Sir, he said clearly, Chloe Bennett owns Guardian Shield Security, Boston's biggest security company. We signed an exclusive multi-million-dollar contract with her company last week. Silence detonated. Not quiet silence. The kind that slams into a room and knocks the breath out of everyone inside it. Stephanie's mouth fell open. Betty's hand flew to her lips. Howard's face drained of color so fast it looked like someone pulled the plug. And beside me, Charlie squeezed my hand and whispered with innocent shock, Mom, they didn't know you own a company? I looked down at my daughter, at her tear-streaked cheeks, her stained dress, her trembling shoulders, and the rage that had been burning inside me turned into something colder, sharper, a calm that frightened even me. Because at that moment, I knew this wasn't just a family argument anymore. This was a reckoning. Charlie's whisper lingered in the air like the last note of a song no one wanted to hear. They didn't know you own a company? I felt her small fingers curl tighter around mine, searching for stability in a room that had just tilted off its axis. For a few heartbeats, no one moved. The soft jazz kept playing, absurdly cheerful, like it was mocking the shock frozen on every face at the table. Howard Parker, my father, stared at me as if I'd just confessed to a crime. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. That's not possible, he said finally, voice hoarse. She's wearing a uniform. David Cooper blinked, then let out a short, incredulous laugh. Of course she is. Ms. Bennett believes in leading from the ground. She often covers shifts personally. It's one of the reasons her company has such a strong reputation. Each word hit the room like a controlled detonation. Stephanie's eyes darted between my face and my uniform, like she was replaying every conversation we'd ever had, every time she'd asked about my position, every time I'd said I was stable and she'd assumed I was lying. My mother's face had gone pale, her lips trembled, wineglass hovering uselessly in her hand. Howard finally found his voice again, but it wasn't the commanding one he liked to use. You own it? He asked, quieter now, smaller. Yes, I said. Just one word. No pride, no gloating. Just truth. The room shifted. I felt it. Not like a celebration, but like a sudden exposure, like the walls had been ripped away and everyone could see the rot underneath the polished surface. David Cooper glanced between us, confusion creeping into his expression. Is there a problem here? He asked carefully. I was told there was a disturbance. I didn't answer him right away. I looked down at Charlie instead, at the way she was trying to be brave, chin lifted, back straight, copying the posture she'd seen adults use when they didn't want to cry. I knelt again, brushing a crumb from her dress with shaking fingers. Baby, I murmured, I'm going to take you home now. She nodded quickly, relief flooding her face like she'd been holding her breath for hours. When I stood, I finally turned back to David. Yes, I said evenly. There is a problem, but I'll handle it. Howard bristled instinctively, old arrogance flaring like a dying flame. This is a family matter, he snapped. You don't need to. I cut him off. No, I said, my voice calm enough to freeze the air. This stopped being a family matter the moment you humiliated my child. The word child echoed. David Cooper's brows drew together. His gaze slid to Charlie, really looked at her this time. At her red eyes, her trembling legs, the way she was still standing. Understanding dawned slowly, then sharply. I see, he said quietly. Howard's shoulders stiffened. This is being blown out of proportion. Enough, David interrupted, his tone firm now. Ms. Bennett, if you need anything, footage, statements, my team will cooperate fully. Howard's head snapped toward him. Footage? I met my father's eyes for the first time that night. Really met them. There are security cameras in this room, I said, and I will be reviewing every second of what happened to my daughter. Stephanie finally spoke, her voice thin and cracking. Chloe, please, let's talk about this later. I looked at her, at my sister, the one who'd promised to pick Charlie up and protect her, the one who'd whispered shame into a child's ear and then watched silently while she stood crying in a corner. There is no later, I said. Howard stepped forward, anger flaring again, fueled now by panic. You wouldn't dare. You'd destroy this family. I let out a breath, slow, steady, so steady. No, I corrected him. You did that yourselves. I turned back to David Cooper. Please secure the footage from the Sapphire Room, I said clearly. I'll need it for my attorney. The word attorney landed like a death sentence. Howard's face drained even further, his bravado finally cracking. This is ridiculous, he muttered, but there was no conviction left in his voice. I bent down and lifted Charlie into my arms. She wrapped her arms around my neck instantly, burying her face into my shoulder like she'd been waiting for permission to collapse. Her breath was warm against my skin, shaky, exhausted. I felt a strange calm settle over me as I carried her toward the door. Behind us, voices erupted, questions, protests, my name being called over and over again. But they sounded distant, unimportant, like background noise in a life I was finally stepping away from. As we crossed the threshold, I heard Howard's voice one last time, raw now, stripped of its authority. Chloe, don't do this. I didn't turn around. The ride home was quiet. Charlie sat curled up in the back seat, knees pulled to her chest. Streetlights slid across her face in soft, passing glows. Every now and then, she lifted a hand to wipe her cheeks, embarrassed by tears she couldn't fully control. I wanted to say something, anything, but I knew this wasn't the moment for explanations. This was the moment for safety. When we arrived at the penthouse, the city lights stretched beneath us like a field of stars, Boston humming quietly, unaware that something fundamental had broken inside me tonight. Inside, the apartment was warm and silent. I set Charlie down on the couch and knelt in front of her. She didn't look at me right away. My legs hurt, she whispered finally. That was it. Not I was scared. Not they were mean. Just my legs hurt. Because she'd stood there, for hours, trying to be good. I pulled her into my arms, holding her so tightly I was afraid she'd disappear if I let go. What did I do wrong? She asked softly. Why wouldn't Grandma and Grandpa let me sit? My heart cracked clean in two. You didn't do anything wrong, I said firmly, pulling back so she could see my face. Nothing. Do you understand me? She nodded slowly, tears spilling again. Is it because you're a security guard? She asked. Is that why they don't like us? I cupped her face gently, thumbs brushing away her tears. Listen to me, Charlie, I said, forcing every ounce of conviction I had into my voice. My job does not decide my worth, and it doesn't decide yours. Ever. She searched my eyes like she was memorizing the words. I own a security company, I continued softly. But even if I didn't, even if I really were just a guard, no one would have the right to treat you that way. No one. Charlie nodded again, slower this time, absorbing something far bigger than the moment. After a light dinner and a bedtime story she barely stayed awake for, I tucked her into bed and waited until her breathing evened out. Only then did I leave her room. Only then did I let my face fall. In my home office, the place where Guardian Shield had been built from sleepless nights and stubborn hope, my laptop chimed. An email. From David Cooper. Attached file. Sapphire Room. _10. _12. _PM.MP4. I clicked play, and there it was. My daughter standing alone in the corner. My family laughing. 2 empty chairs glowing like a silent accusation. That was the moment I understood something with terrifying clarity. The night at Harborview wasn't the end of this story. It was the beginning of a war. The next morning, Boston looked the same. Cars crawled through traffic. Coffee shops opened their doors. People complained about the weather like nothing in the world had shifted. But for me, everything had. After dropping Charlie off at school, hugging her longer than usual, ignoring the curious looks from other parents, I drove straight to an office overlooking the Charles River. Melissa Thompson, Boston's top child rights attorney. Her office was flooded with late morning sunlight, glass walls reflecting a city that liked to believe it was progressive, fair, evolved. The video played silently on the large screen mounted behind her desk. Charlie standing in the corner. My family laughing. 2 empty chairs. Melissa paused the footage at the exact moment Howard raised his wineglass and smiled. Her jaw tightened. This, she said, pointing at the screen, is a clear case of psychological abuse and discrimination against a minor. I exhaled slowly, my chest aching as I stared at my father's frozen face. I don't want to destroy my family, I said quietly, but I won't let them think they can treat my daughter like that and walk away. Melissa nodded, already flipping through notes. Intent doesn't matter here. Impact does. And the impact on your child is undeniable. Through the frosted glass wall, I could see Charlie in the waiting area, sitting with Melissa's assistant. She was drawing, head bent, blonde hair falling forward, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. She looked calm, and that hurt more than if she'd been crying, because calm meant she was already adapting, already learning how to make herself small. Melissa followed my gaze and softened her tone. It was the right call not bringing her in here. I nodded. Melissa leaned forward. Your family owns the Parker fashion chain, correct? Yes, I said, tension creeping back into my shoulders. My father built it from nothing. It's his pride, his entire identity. Melissa's eyes sharpened, not with cruelty, but with clarity. Then you need to understand something, she said. This lawsuit won't just cost them money, it will cost them reputation. She let that sink in. Families like yours, she continued, care more about public image than private pain. I swallowed. They've already started calling, I admitted, my sister especially. Melissa gave a small, knowing smile. They will try to settle, quickly, quietly. They'll want to make this disappear. I don't want hush money, I said immediately. I want them to understand what they did. Melissa studied me for a long moment. Then she nodded once. Then we proceed publicly, she said, and carefully. Within 15 minutes, the paperwork was drafted. The footage was logged. The lawsuit was filed. When I left Melissa's office, the city felt different, like it was holding its breath. The calls started that night. Stephanie first, then my mother, then my father. I didn't answer a single one. Instead, I did something I'd never planned to do. I shared the story. Not publicly, not on social media. Privately, within the service industry, the security networks, restaurant worker groups I'd been part of for years. I edited the video carefully. Faces blurred, voices muted, no names, no brands. Just actions, just truth. I wrote one line above the clip. This is how an upper-class family treated their own granddaughter because they were ashamed of her mother's job. I hit send. The response was immediate. Security guards shared it with bartenders. Bartenders shared it with servers. Servers shared it with managers. Managers shared it with owners. And slowly, inevitably, it reached people with platforms. Within days, the story had a name. #standing. Standing while eating. Standing while being judged. Standing because someone decided you didn't belong. I never named the Parker family. I didn't have to. Boston is small when reputation is involved. By the time the lawsuit papers were formally served, the damage had already begun. Customer traffic at Parker fashion stores dropped sharply. Longtime partners pulled out pending review. Suppliers delayed shipments. Articles started appearing, carefully worded, heavily implied. And the calls became desperate. 2 months passed. 2 months of letters from lawyers offering settlements. 2 months of emails full of apologies that never once mentioned Charlie's name. 2 months of silence from me. Because every time I considered responding, I saw Charlie standing in that corner. And my resolve hardened. Then, one Tuesday morning, while I was reviewing a new contract with a 5-star hotel, my assistant knocked softly on my office door. Ms. Bennett, she said uneasily, your parents are here. They say it's urgent. My heartbeat spiked. I closed the folder slowly. Let them in, I said. When the door opened, I barely recognized them. Howard Parker looked smaller, thinner, grayer. His shoulders sagged like they were carrying a weight he'd never learned how to bear. My mother clutched her purse with trembling hands, eyes red and swollen like she'd been crying for days. They stood in my office like strangers. Howard glanced around at the space, my space, with barely hidden disbelief. Nice office, he said weakly. You've done well. I didn't invite them to sit. What do you want? I asked flatly. My mother stepped forward first, voice shaking. Chloe, we're family. What happened was very unfortunate. Unfortunate. The word made my jaw clench. You humiliated my daughter, I said, and you're calling it unfortunate. Howard sighed, shoulders slumping. I was wrong, he admitted. What we did to Charlie, it was shameful. I searched his face, not for words, for truth. All I saw was fear. Fear of losing everything. And now you're here because the video is spreading, I said quietly. Because your stores are empty. Because your partners are leaving. My mother broke down then, sobbing openly. We're losing everything, she cried. 200 employees could lose their jobs. Howard bowed his head. I'm begging you, he said. As a father, please, drop the lawsuit. I leaned back in my chair, studying them. These were the people who taught me worth was conditional, who taught me love came with expectations. And now they wanted mercy. I'll think about it, I said slowly. Hope flickered across their faces. But if I do anything, I continued, it won't be because you're scared. It'll be because you understand. They left looking defeated. And as the door closed behind them, a thought crystallized in my mind. The law could punish them. Public opinion could crush them. But neither would teach them what it felt like to stand alone. I already knew how I was going to do that. That night, after dinner dishes were rinsed and the apartment settled into its usual quiet hum, I sat across from Charlie at the living room table. 2 mugs of hot chocolate steamed between us. She was doing her homework, pencil tapping absently against the page, but her eyes kept drifting up to my face, searching. I knew that look. It was the look of a child who sensed adults were making decisions that might change everything. Mom? She asked softly. Yes, sweetheart? Grandma and Grandpa, did they come to see you today? I paused. Charlie hadn't asked what they wanted. She hadn't asked what they said. She'd asked the only question that mattered to her. Did they apologize? Something tightened painfully in my chest. They did, I said honestly, but I don't think it was only about you. Her brows knit together. Is it because their stores are in trouble? I stared at her. 11 years old, and already worrying about consequences that didn't belong to her. That's not your responsibility, I said firmly, reaching across the table to take her hand. They made choices. Adults live with the results of their choices. Charlie nodded slowly, absorbing that. Then she looked up at me again, hope flickering stubbornly in her eyes. Are we going to forgive them? I didn't answer right away. Because forgiveness isn't a switch. It's a process. I'm thinking about a plan, I said carefully. One that might help them understand how you felt that night. Charlie tilted her head. How? I squeezed her hand gently, by letting them experience it. Her eyes widened, not with fear, but curiosity. Will it hurt them? She asked. The question wasn't accusatory. It was thoughtful. I shook my head, not physically, but it will be uncomfortable. Charlie was quiet for a long moment, staring into her hot chocolate like she was reading answers in the steam. Then she said something that stunned me. Sometimes people don't know they're being mean until they feel it themselves. I stared at my daughter, at the wisdom sitting casually in a blue hoodie and mismatched socks. You're right, I said softly. A week later, I called Melissa Thompson. I'm considering dropping the lawsuit, I told her. She nearly dropped her pen. Chloe, she said sharply, you have an airtight case. This would be a landmark ruling. I know, I said, but I want something else. I explained my idea. When I finished, Melissa leaned back slowly, eyes searching my face. This isn't about revenge, she said finally. It's about education. Exactly. After a moment, she nodded. Legally, it's sound. Ethically, she smiled faintly. It's powerful. The condition was simple. If the Parker family wanted the lawsuit withdrawn, they would attend a reconciliation dinner at my home. All of them. No lawyers. No press. And Melissa would be present as a neutral witness. They agreed within an hour. The night of the dinner arrived quietly. My apartment had never looked more intentional. Crystal lights glowed softly. Music played low and elegant. The table was set with care, not to impress, but to command attention. Charlie wore her favorite blue dress, hair braided neatly. She stayed close to me, fingers occasionally brushing mine like she was checking that I was still there. The doorbell rang exactly at 7. Melissa arrived first, 15 minutes early as promised. She settled discreetly into a corner of the living room, files on her lap, observant and silent. When I opened the door again, my parents stood there stiffly. Howard held an expensive bottle of wine. My mother clutched a small gift bag. Stephanie stood behind them, eyes darting nervously. Welcome, I said politely. Come in. They stepped inside, and I watched their faces shift as they took in the space. The art on the walls, the bookshelves, the view, the unspoken realization that I hadn't just survived without them. I'd built something. Charlie stepped forward, slipping her hand into mine. "Dinner's ready," I said. "Please." We entered the dining room together, and they stopped dead. The long table was set beautifully. The food smelled incredible, and there were only 2 chairs. One for me, one for Charlie. Silence fell heavy. My mother spoke first, forcing a smile that didn't quite work. "Oh, did you forget to bring the other chairs?" I met her eyes calmly. "No," I said, "I didn't forget." Howard's brow furrowed. "What is this?" I pulled out Charlie's chair and helped her sit, then took my own. "You'll be standing tonight," I said evenly, "just like Charlie stood for 2 hours at your party." The air thickened instantly. Stephanie's face drained of color. My mother grabbed Howard's arm like she was afraid he'd explode. "This is ridiculous," Howard snapped. "We came here to reconcile, not to be humiliated." I didn't raise my voice. "Reconciliation starts with understanding," I said. "This is understanding." Howard took a step back, fury and shame battling in his expression. "This is an insult," he said. "Let's go." He turned toward the door, and Charlie stood up. "Wait, Grandpa." Every eye snapped to her. She stood there in her blue dress, small but steady. "I think we should get more chairs," she said softly. Howard turned back, stunned. Charlie continued, voice gentle but clear. "I don't want anyone to feel the way I felt." The room fell into a deeper silence than before. My throat closed. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and realized something humbling. She had already learned the lesson I was still struggling to master. Breaking the cycle mattered more than winning. Howard's shoulders sagged. Slowly, painfully, he stepped forward. "I'll help," he said quietly. Together, we went to the next room and carried in chairs. No words, just actions. When everyone finally sat, Howard cleared his throat. "Chloe," he said, "Charlie." His voice trembled. "I'm sorry, truly, not just for that night, but for the years before it." My mother nodded, eyes wet. We cared too much about appearances. We forgot what mattered. Stephanie spoke last, barely above a whisper. "I should have protected her. I didn't. I'm sorry." I didn't say I forgave them. I said this was a beginning. And for the first time, it felt honest. The night ended quietly. No dramatic hugs, no instant forgiveness, no declarations that everything was suddenly fixed. And somehow that made it real. After my parents and Stephanie left, Charlie helped me clear the table. She moved slowly, thoughtfully, like she was replaying the evening in her head. When the last plate was rinsed, she leaned against the counter and looked up at me. "Mom," she said, hesitating, "do you think they really understand now?" I considered the question carefully. "I think," I said, "they've started to." She nodded, satisfied with that answer. Not hopeful, not bitter, just grounded. And that told me more than any apology ever could. The lawsuit was officially withdrawn 2 weeks later. Not quietly, not secretly. The Parker family released a public statement through their business channels, carefully written, deliberate, impossible to misinterpret. They took responsibility. Not for misunderstandings, not for poor communication, for harm. They acknowledged the discrimination. They acknowledged the impact on a child. They acknowledged that success without empathy is failure in disguise. It shook Boston's business community. And for the first time in my life, my family didn't try to soften the truth to protect their image. They let it cost them. Howard stepped down within 6 months. He transferred leadership of the fashion chain to Stephanie, but not without conditions. 10% of all annual profits were redirected to child rights organizations and service worker advocacy programs. Not as charity, as accountability. Stephanie took the role seriously. She showed up to meetings differently, spoke differently, listened longer, and one afternoon she called me, not to apologize again, but to ask for help. She wanted Guardian Shield to collaborate on workplace protection programs. I said yes, not because I forgot, but because I believed in forward motion. Charlie healed in quiet ways. She didn't talk about that night often, but she changed after it. At family dinners, whether at my place or my parents', she always checked the chairs first, counting, adding extras. "Just in case," she'd say seriously, "no one should have to stand unless they want to." It became a rule, an unspoken one, but a sacred one. Betty started coming by on weekends, not with expectations. With cookie dough, she and Charlie baked together, flour on their noses, laughter filling the kitchen like something long overdue. Howard moved slower now, softer. He listened more than he spoke. And when he did speak, it was usually to ask Charlie what she thought. That still surprised him. A year later, we gathered again, this time for Howard's 66th birthday. Different restaurant, different energy, no VIP room. Just a long table, sunlight streaming in, chairs pulled close together. Charlie sat beside me, swinging her legs slightly, humming under her breath. Howard raised his glass, not for a speech about success or legacy or business, but for something simpler. Thank you, he said, voice steady, for teaching me what dignity really looks like. Charlie smiled, and in that moment I understood something deeply. Revenge demands distance, justice demands consequences. But healing demands courage. The courage to confront pain, the courage to sit in discomfort, the courage to let a child lead when adults have failed. Charlie taught us that. She taught us that breaking the cycle matters more than winning an argument. That empathy isn't weakness. That sometimes the most powerful lesson isn't spoken, it's felt. So if you've ever been judged because of your job, your status, or the path you chose, remember this. Worth isn't measured by titles. Dignity doesn't depend on approval. And there should always, always be enough chairs.